The knock on my door came at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday, which should have been my first warning that something was about to go very wrong. I stumbled out of bed, still groggy, and found two uniformed police officers standing on my porch in suburban Naperville, Illinois. Behind them stood Patricia Hensley, the president of our homeowners association, looking like she had just won the lottery. Her arms were crossed. Her perfectly highlighted blonde hair was styled despite the early hour, and she wore that expression I had come to dread over the past 3 years of living in Meadowbrook Commons. "Officers, that is the noise I was telling you about," Patricia said, pointing past me into my house. "It has been disturbing the entire neighborhood for weeks now." I blinked at them, confused. "What noise?" "Sir, we have received multiple complaints about excessive noise coming from your property," one of the officers said. He was young, maybe mid-20s, and looked like he would rather be anywhere else. "Mind if we come in and take a look?" Sure," I said, stepping aside. My name is William Kowalski, and I had lived in this house for 3 years without a single problem until Patricia became HOA president 6 months ago. Since then, she had cited me for everything from my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall to my mailbox being the wrong shade of black. The officers walked through my living room, and I suddenly realized what Patricia was talking about. My steam boiler. I had just had it installed 2 weeks ago, replacing the old forced air system that came with the house. The gentle hissing and occasional gurgling sounds were barely audible in the basement, but if you stood near the floor vents you could hear it. "That is the sound, officers," Patricia said triumphantly as we all stood in my living room. "It runs constantly, day and night. My bedroom shares a wall with this property and I cannot sleep." I stared at her. "Patricia, your house is 40 feet away from mine. There is no way you can hear my boiler through 2 exterior walls. Are you calling me a liar, William?" The second officer, an older man with gray at his temples, held up his hand. "Let us just take a look at this boiler. Where is it located?" I led them down to my basement, flipping on the lights. My brand new steam boiler sat in the corner, humming quietly. It was a beautiful piece of equipment, energy efficient, and had cost me $12,000 to install. The inspector had signed off on it just last week. The older officer walked around it, listening. The younger one pulled out his phone, probably running a decibel meter app. After a full minute of silence, the older officer turned to Patricia. "Madam, this is well within normal operating parameters for a heating system. I have one similar in my own home." Patricia's face flushed red. "But the noise is minimal and contained within the property owner's home," the officer continued. "There is no violation here. These systems are standard in older neighborhoods throughout the Midwest." "This neighborhood has regulations," Patricia insisted, pulling out her phone. She scrolled frantically, then showed the screen to the officers. Section 12, subsection 4, paragraph 3. No resident shall install or maintain equipment that produces excessive noise or vibration that disturbs other residents. The younger officer glanced at it. "Madam, with respect, HOA regulations do not supersede common sense or local noise ordinances. This heating system is not excessive." I felt a small surge of satisfaction, but I kept my mouth shut. Patricia looked like she was about to explode. "I want this inspected by the village," she said. "The proper authorities need to verify this is safe and up to code." "Madam, you can call the building department if you want," the older officer said, clearly tired of this situation. "But we are done here. Sir, have a good day." As they left, Patricia turned to me, her eyes narrowed. "I will be calling the village building department, and when they find violations, you will be removing that monstrosity." "It was inspected and approved," I said. "I have all the permits. We will see about that." She stormed out and I closed the door, exhaling. This was going to be a problem. I knew Patricia well enough by now to understand she would not let this go. Sure enough, 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the Village of Naperville Building Department. They were scheduling an inspection of my steam boiler system in response to a complaint. The inspection would take place the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning, and I was required to be present and provide access to the system as well as all permits and installation documentation. I called my installer, a guy named Rick Tomlin, who ran a family heating business that had been operating in the western suburbs for 40 years. "They are doing what?" Rick asked when I explained the situation. "The HOA president called in a complaint. Now the village wants to inspect it." Rick laughed. "William, I have been installing these systems since before you were born. Your boiler is perfect. I will come by for the inspection, bring all my paperwork. Do not worry about it." But I was worried. Patricia had a way of making problems out of nothing, and I had seen her chase out 2 other homeowners in the past 6 months over petty violations that she had somehow escalated into major issues. That Saturday, I ran into my neighbor Tom Westfield at the grocery store. Tom was in his late 60s, had lived in Meadowbrook Commons since the development was built in 1994, and served on the HOA board before Patricia took over. "Heard Patricia is giving you grief about your new heating system," Tom said as we stood in the produce section. "News travels fast. She has been talking about it at every opportunity. Keeps saying you are ruining the neighborhood with industrial equipment." Tom shook his head. "That woman has no idea what she is talking about. Half the houses in this development have steam boilers. They were standard when these places were built." "Really?" "Absolutely. My house has one. The Johnsons 3 doors down, the Parkers on Elm Street, probably 30 or 40 houses total. They are reliable systems." "Then why is she making such a big deal out of mine?" Tom picked up a cantaloupe, examined it, and set it down. "Between you and me, I think Patricia has it out for you specifically. You voted against her for HOA president." I had forgotten about that. It had been a close election, and I had supported Tom's candidate, a reasonable woman named Susan who actually cared about the neighborhood rather than just wielding power. "She holds grudges," Tom continued. "Be careful, and make sure everything is documented at that inspection." The following Tuesday arrived cold and gray, typical for late November in Illinois. Rick showed up at 9:30, carrying a large folder of documents and wearing his company jacket. He was a solid guy in his mid-50s with perpetually oil-stained hands and an easy smile. "Ready for this circus?" he asked as we walked down to the basement. "As ready as I can be." The village inspector arrived promptly at 10. His name was George Martinez, and he had been inspecting buildings in Naperville for 15 years, according to the ID badge he showed me. He was thorough and professional, asking Rick detailed questions about the installation, examining every pipe joint, checking the pressure relief valve, testing the automatic water feeder, and reviewing all the permits. Halfway through the inspection, Patricia showed up. I had not invited her, but apparently she had convinced someone at the village that, as HOA president, she had a right to be present. "Is it safe?" she demanded as soon as she came down the basement stairs. George looked up from his clipboard. "Madam, I am still conducting my inspection. Please wait upstairs. I have a right to know if this equipment is endangering my property." "Madam, upstairs." Now, Patricia huffed but complied. I could hear her pacing in my living room above us. George spent another 30 minutes going over everything. He made Rick demonstrate the system operation, checked the condensate return, examined the radiation distribution throughout the house, and even pulled out a thermal camera to look at the heat distribution patterns. Finally, he straightened up and made some notes on his clipboard. "Well," I asked. "This is one of the cleanest installations I have seen in years," George said. "Everything is to code, properly permitted, and functioning exactly as it should. You are good to go." Rick grinned. "Told you." "However," George continued, and my stomach dropped, "I do need to note something for my report. When was the last time the HOA community center boiler was inspected?" "The community center?" I asked, confused. "Yeah. Standard procedure when I get a complaint like this, I check the public records for the neighborhood." "Your HOA has a community center with a pool and gym, right?" "Right. According to our database, the boiler system there has not been inspected since 1995. Rick's eyebrows shot up. 1995? That is 30 years. "Almost exactly," George said. "State law requires commercial boiler systems to be inspected every 3 years. This is a serious violation. I am going to have to flag this." Patricia had apparently been listening from the top of the stairs because she came rushing down. "What are you talking about?" George turned to her. "Madam, are you the HOA president?" "Yes." "When was the last time you had the community center boiler inspected?" Patricia's face went blank. We have maintenance. Someone handles that." "You have documentation of the last inspection?" "I would have to check." George pulled out his phone and made a call. He spoke quietly for a minute, then hung up. "I am required to perform an immediate safety inspection of that system. It is a liability issue. Can you provide me access to the community center now?" "Yes, but—" "This is not optional, madam. If that system has not been inspected in 30 years, it could be a danger to everyone who uses that facility." We all drove over to the community center, which was located at the entrance to the neighborhood. It was a nice building, maybe 5,000 square feet, with a gym, a pool, and several meeting rooms. Patricia fumbled with her keys at the door, her hands shaking slightly. The boiler room was in the basement, access through a door off the pool equipment area. When George opened it and flipped on the lights, even I could tell something was wrong. The boiler was massive, easily 4 times the size of my residential unit, and it was covered in rust. Pipes had been wrapped with duct tape in several places. There were water stains on the floor. A small puddle had formed near the base of the unit. Rick whistled low. "That is a disaster waiting to happen." George immediately started taking photos. He walked around the system, not touching anything, just documenting. When he pulled out his thermal camera, his expression grew grim. "This system is actively leaking," George said. "The pressure vessel is compromised. This entire unit needs to be shut down immediately." "You cannot shut it down," Patricia said. "We have a yoga class tonight and the pool is open tomorrow morning." "Madam, this is a safety issue. If this vessel fails, it could cause serious injury or death. I am issuing an immediate shutdown order." "On what authority?" George pulled out a form and started writing. "On the authority of the State of Illinois Boiler and Pressure Vessel Safety Act. This facility is now closed until a licensed contractor can replace this system and pass a full inspection." Patricia's face had gone pale. "Do you have any idea how much that will cost?" "More than a funeral," George said flatly. He turned to Rick. "You do commercial installations." "I can do the work, but we are talking probably $80,000 to $100,000 for a system this size." Patricia actually swayed on her feet. I thought she might faint. George finished writing his report and handed Patricia a copy. "You have 48 hours to post notice that this facility is closed. You will need to hire a licensed contractor to provide an estimate and timeline for replacement. Once the new system is installed, it will need to pass a full inspection before you can reopen. You understand?" Patricia nodded mutely. George turned to me. Your system is fine, Mr. Kowalski. I will file my report with the village. You should receive written confirmation within a week. He looked back at Patricia. I will also be filing a report with the State Inspector General about the lapsed inspections. Someone from that office will likely be in contact with your HOA board. We all walked out of the community center. Rick clapped me on the shoulder. Well, that was more exciting than I expected. Thanks for coming out. Anytime, and hey, your system is rock solid. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. As Rick drove away, Patricia turned to me. Her expression had shifted from shock to anger. This is your fault. How is this my fault? If you had not installed that ridiculous boiler, none of this would have happened. Patricia, your community center boiler was a death trap. George just saved lives. You brought him here. No, you did. You filed the complaint about my system, remember? She opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to realize I was right. Without another word, she got in her car and drove away. I walked home, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and concern. The community center was a major amenity for the neighborhood. People used it constantly. Having it shut down was going to cause serious problems, and I knew Patricia would find some way to blame me for it. That evening, I received an email from the HOA board calling an emergency meeting for Thursday night. The subject line read, "Critical infrastructure issue." All residents were strongly encouraged to attend. I called Tom Westfield. "Did you get the email? Just read it." "I heard what happened at the community center. George Martinez called me, actually. We go way back." "He did?" "Yeah, he wanted me to know what he found because I am still on the board, technically." "William, this is bad. The HOA has about 40,000 in reserves. We need at least 80,000 for a new boiler, maybe more. We are going to have to do a special assessment." "A what?" "Every homeowner in the development is going to have to pay a share of the replacement cost, probably around $800 per house." I did the math. Meadowbrook Commons had about 120 houses. That would only cover 60% of the cost. The board will have to finance the rest, which means increasing the monthly HOA dues to cover the loan payments. This is going to hit everyone's wallet hard. And Patricia is going to blame me for it. Probably. But here is the thing, William. Patricia and her supporters have been running the HOA finances for 6 months now. They were responsible for making sure maintenance was up to date. The previous board always kept detailed records of when things were serviced and inspected. If that boiler has not been looked at in 30 years, someone dropped the ball big time. You think Patricia knew about it? I think she should have known about it. That is her job. Thursday night arrived, and the emergency HOA meeting was held at the Naperville Municipal Center since our own community center was condemned. The room was packed. I counted at least 90 people, which was probably the highest attendance we had ever had for an HOA meeting. Patricia stood at the front of the room with 2 other board members, Linda Reynolds and Gary Chen. Linda was Patricia's best friend and biggest supporter. Gary was a quiet guy who mostly just went along with whatever Patricia wanted. Patricia called the meeting to order, then immediately launched into her prepared statement. As many of you have heard, our community center has been temporarily closed due to an equipment issue. The boiler system requires replacement, and we are currently seeking estimates from contractors. "Temporarily," someone shouted from the back. "I heard it is completely shot." Patricia's jaw tightened. "The system is outdated and needs to be replaced. We are working diligently to resolve this as quickly as possible." "How much is it going to cost?" another voice called out. "We are still gathering estimates. George Martinez from the village told me it was at least 80,000, Tom Westfield said, standing up. And he said the system had not been inspected in 30 years. How did that happen? The room erupted in conversation. Patricia tried to regain control, banging her gavel on the podium. The previous board was responsible for maintenance schedules, Patricia said when things quieted down. This is an inherited problem. Tom's face turned red. That is a lie, Patricia, and you know it. I was on the previous board for 8 years. We had that boiler serviced annually and kept detailed records. When your board took over in May, we turned over every single document. You had a complete maintenance history. I never saw any such records, Patricia insisted, because you did not look. Tom was furious now. We stored everything in the community center office in the filing cabinets. Did you ever even check? I reviewed the financial records. Not the maintenance records, not the inspection certificates, not the service contracts. You fired the maintenance company we had used for 10 years and hired your brother-in-law's company instead. Did his company ever inspect the boiler? Patricia's face flushed. That is a personal attack, Tom. I will not tolerate this. It is a fact. Your brother-in-law, Mark, runs a landscaping company. He has no qualifications to maintain a commercial boiler system. We had a licensed HVAC contractor, and you got rid of them to save money. The room exploded again. People were shouting questions. Someone demanded to see the records. Another person wanted to know if the HOA could be sued for negligence. Patricia banged her gavel repeatedly. We will conduct an internal review of what happened. Right now, we need to focus on fixing the problem. The estimated cost for a new boiler system is between $80,000 and $100,000. We have $40,000 in reserves, which means we will need to assess each household approximately $800 to cover the immediate cost, and we will need to secure financing for the remainder. $800. A woman in the front row stood up. We are supposed to come up with $800 because you screwed up. This is not about assigning blame, Patricia said. This is about moving forward. The hell it is not about blame, the woman continued. My family uses that pool 3 times a week. We pay our HOA dues specifically for access to those facilities. And now, you are telling me that not only can we not use them, but we also have to pay extra because you did not do your job. Gary Chen, who had been silent until now, leaned toward his microphone. We are also going to need to increase monthly dues by $50 to cover the loan payments. The room went absolutely berserk. People were on their feet, shouting. Someone threw a wadded-up piece of paper toward the front. I had never seen anything like it. I raised my hand and waited for Patricia to acknowledge me. It took several minutes for her to regain enough control of the room to call on people. Yes, William, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. I stood up. I have a question about the timeline. When exactly did you last have the boiler inspected? I told you, we are reviewing the records. But you have been president for 6 months. In that time, did you or anyone on your board ever have the boiler looked at? Patricia did not answer. Tom stood up again. Answer his question, Patricia. We hired a maintenance company. They were supposed to handle all of that. Your brother-in-law, Tom said, who is not licensed for boiler maintenance. He subcontracts that work. To who? Show us the invoices. Show us proof that the boiler was serviced even once in the past 6 months. Patricia looked at Linda and Gary. Neither of them said anything. You have no proof, Tom said, because it was never done. You cut costs, ignored safety, and now you want us to pay for your negligence. This meeting is adjourned, Patricia said, grabbing her papers. You cannot just adjourn in the middle of a discussion, someone yelled. I just did. Patricia stormed out with Linda and Gary trailing behind her. The room dissolved into chaos. People clustered in groups, talking angrily. I found Tom near the back. That went well, I said. This is just the beginning, Tom replied. People are furious. If Patricia tries to push through that special assessment without a proper vote, there is going to be a revolt. He was right. Over the next week, the neighborhood Facebook group exploded with posts. People shared photos of the rusty boiler. Someone dug up the maintenance records from the previous board, showing annual inspections and service calls up until May of this year. Multiple residents demanded Patricia's resignation. Patricia, for her part, went silent. No emails, no updates, no communication at all from the board. Then, on the following Wednesday, I received a violation notice in my mailbox. According to Patricia, my trash cans were visible from the street, which violated Section 8 of the HOA covenants. I needed to install screening to hide them within 15 days or face a $50 fine. I took a photo of my trash cans, which were in my garage, completely invisible from the street, and posted it to the Facebook group with the caption, "Apparently these invisible trash cans are a violation." The post got 200 comments in an hour. Other people started sharing their own ridiculous violations they had received from Patricia. Someone got cited for a lawn ornament that was actually a reflection of light on their window. Another person was fined for parking a commercial vehicle in their driveway, even though they drove a Honda Accord. It became clear that Patricia was retaliating against anyone who had spoken up at the meeting or posted critical comments online. That is when Tom Westfield filed a formal complaint with the Illinois Attorney General's office. He claimed that Patricia and the current board were engaging in harassment, had violated their fiduciary duty to the HOA members, and had potentially broken state laws regarding HOA governance and financial management. I did not know Tom had done this until 2 weeks later, when an investigator from the Attorney General's office showed up at my door. Her name was Rachel Singh, and she was thorough, professional, and very interested in what had happened with my boiler inspection. "Mr. Kowalski, can you walk me through the timeline of events?" Rachel asked, sitting in my living room with a notepad. I told her everything, from the initial installation of my boiler to the police visit, the inspection, the discovery of the community center problem, and the disastrous HOA meeting. Rachel took detailed notes. "And you have documentation of all this?" she asked. "I have the inspection reports, the permits, emails from Patricia, the violation notices, pretty much everything. Can you send me copies?" "Absolutely." Rachel interviewed several other residents over the following weeks. The investigation expanded beyond just the boiler issue. It turned out Patricia had been using HOA funds inappropriately, paying her brother-in-law's company for services that were never performed, and had failed to file several required financial disclosures with the state. In mid-January, almost 2 months after the initial inspection, the Attorney General's office issued a formal report. The findings were damning. Patricia had violated multiple sections of the Illinois Condominium and Common Interest Community Association Act. She had engaged in self-dealing by awarding contracts to her brother-in-law without proper bidding. She had failed to maintain required insurance on the community center. And most seriously, she had knowingly neglected a safety hazard after being informed about the boiler issues by the previous board during the transition. It turned out that Tom had not been lying. The previous board had specifically noted the upcoming need for boiler inspection in their transition documents. Patricia had signed a receipt for those documents, but had never followed up. The Attorney General's report recommended that the HOA membership vote to remove Patricia from the board, and that the state pursue civil penalties against her for the financial violations. The vote was scheduled for early February. It was not even close. Patricia was removed from the board by a vote of 97-3. Linda and Gary both resigned rather than face removal votes themselves. Tom Westfield was voted in as interim president, and two other longtime residents, Susan Mitchell and David Park, were elected to fill the other board positions. But the story did not end there. In late February, Patricia received a summons to appear in court. The state was pursuing civil charges against her for the financial violations, and several HOA members, including me, were pursuing a civil suit to recover the costs of her negligence. The special assessment had gone through. We all had to pay our $800, and the new boiler was being installed at a cost of $95,000. The HOA had to take out a loan for the remaining balance, which meant our dues went up by $60 a month for the next 5 years. People were angry, and they wanted someone to be held accountable. The court hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early March. I took the day off work to attend. The courtroom was packed with residents from Meadowbrook Commons. Patricia sat at the defendant's table with her lawyer, a tired-looking man in an ill-fitting suit. The state's attorney laid out the case methodically. Patricia had violated her fiduciary duty to the HOA. She had awarded contracts without proper approval. She had failed to maintain required safety standards. She had retaliated against residents who questioned her authority. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that these were simple mistakes, not criminal acts, but the evidence was overwhelming. Emails showed Patricia had been warned about the boiler by Tom during the transition. Financial records showed payments to her brother-in-law's company for services that were never documented. Residents testified about the retaliatory violations. The judge was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s named Maria Torres. She listened to everything, reviewed the documents, and then delivered her ruling. Miss Hensley, your conduct as HOA president was not just negligent, it was reckless. You put the safety of your neighbors at risk. You misused community funds, and you abused your position to harass residents who disagreed with you. I am ordering you to pay restitution to the HOA in the amount of $15,000, which represents the financial damages caused by your improper contract awards. You are also ordered to pay a civil penalty of $5,000 to the state. Additionally, you are prohibited from serving on any HOA board in the state of Illinois for a period of 10 years. Patricia's face crumpled. She looked like she might cry, but she held it together. You understand these penalties? Judge Torres asked. Yes, Your Honor, Patricia said quietly. Good. You have 90 days to make the first payment. A payment plan will be arranged through the court. As we filed out of the courtroom, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with exhaustion. This whole ordeal had consumed nearly 4 months of my life. My simple decision to install a more efficient heating system had somehow uncovered a massive safety hazard, exposed financial mismanagement, and led to legal action against an HOA president who had let power go to her head. Tom caught up with me in the hallway. Buy you a coffee? Sure. We went to a coffee shop down the street from the courthouse. Tom ordered a black coffee. I got a latte. You know what the crazy thing is? Tom said as we sat down, if Patricia had just left you alone, none of this would have come out. The boiler probably would have kept running for a few more months, maybe even a year, before it finally failed. By then, she might have moved away or been voted out normally. But she got so obsessed with proving you were wrong that she brought in an inspector who discovered the truth. Pride goes before a fall, I said. Something like that. Tom sipped his coffee. The new boiler should be operational by the end of the month, by the way. We are also having it inspected quarterly for the first year, just to make sure everything is working correctly. and I have put together a comprehensive maintenance schedule for all community property. We are never letting something like this happen again." "That is good. Your boiler is still working fine, I assume," I smiled. "Perfectly. Best $12,000 I ever spent." Even with all the headache it caused, especially because of the headache it caused. If my boiler installation had not triggered all of this, someone could have been seriously hurt when that old system finally gave out. Tom nodded. "True, very true." We finished our coffee and walked back to our cars. The weather had started to warm up, early spring arriving in Chicago after a brutal winter. The whole ordeal felt like it was finally coming to a close, but there was still one more shoe to drop. In late April, just as the new community center boiler was passing its final inspection and the facility was set to reopen, I received a call from George Martinez, the village inspector. "Mr. Kowalski, this is George Martinez. We met back in November regarding your boiler installation." "I remember. Is everything okay?" "With your system, yes. But I wanted to give you a heads up. The State Inspector General's office has expanded their investigation. They are looking at all HOA-managed properties in the Chicago suburbs to identify other potential safety violations." "Your case kind of opened a can of worms." "Really?" "Yeah. Turns out neglected maintenance on community infrastructure is way more common than anyone realized. They have already identified 8 other developments with similar issues. Overdue inspections, improper record keeping, unqualified maintenance contractors. It is a systemic problem." "Wow. The state is probably going to pass new legislation requiring annual safety audits for all HOA-managed common areas. They are calling it the Community Safety Accountability Act." Your boiler inspection basically triggered a statewide reform movement. After I hung up with George, I sat on my couch for a long moment, processing this information. My simple home improvement project had not only exposed problems in my own neighborhood, but had somehow catalyzed broader changes to how HOAs operated across the entire state. A few weeks later, I was working in my front yard, planting new flowers in the beds along the sidewalk, when a moving truck pulled up to Patricia's house. I watched as movers loaded furniture and boxes. Patricia came out, saw me watching, and for a moment our eyes met across the lawn. She looked older than she had 6 months ago, tired, defeated. I raised my hand in a small wave, not friendly but not hostile either, just an acknowledgement. Patricia nodded once and got into her car. She drove away and I never saw her again. The community center reopened in early May with a big celebration. Tom organized a neighborhood barbecue and probably 200 people showed up. The new boiler hummed quietly in the basement, efficient and safe, exactly as it should be. I was standing by the pool, watching kids splash in the water when Susan Mitchell came up to me. "You know, William, in a weird way, we all owe you a thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not backing down. Patricia tried to bully you into removing a perfectly good heating system, and you stood your ground. If you had just caved to her demands, we never would have discovered the community center problem. Someone could have been killed." "I was just trying to keep my house warm," I said. Susan laughed. "Well, your stubbornness saved lives. That is not nothing." As the sun set over Meadowbrook Commons that evening, I reflected on the strange journey of the past 6 months. I had bought a house in a nice suburban development, expecting a quiet life. Instead, I had become embroiled in HOA drama, legal battles, state investigations, and regulatory reform. My steam boiler continued to heat my home perfectly, the gentle hissing and gurgling a constant reminder of how something so simple could trigger such massive consequences. The new HOA board, led by Tom, operated with transparency and accountability. Monthly financial reports were posted online. Maintenance schedules were published and followed religiously. Residents were encouraged to attend meetings and voice concerns. It turned out that good governance was not complicated. It just required people who actually cared about the community more than they cared about power. In June, I received a letter from the state legislature thanking me for my cooperation with their investigation. The Community Safety Accountability Act had passed both houses and was awaiting the governor's signature. Once signed, it would require all HOAs in Illinois to conduct annual safety audits of their common infrastructure and maintain detailed maintenance records subject to state review. I framed the letter and hung it in my basement, right next to my boiler inspection certificate. Life in Meadowbrook Commons gradually returned to normal. The community center was busy again. People used the pool and gym without worrying about whether the building might explode. Tom proved to be an excellent HOA president, focused on practical matters rather than petty enforcement of arbitrary rules. I never received another violation notice. One Saturday in July, I was grilling in my backyard when Tom stopped by with a six-pack of beer. "Thought you might want company," he said. "Always welcome." We sat on my deck, drinking beer and watching the sun set. Tom told me stories about the early days of Meadowbrook Commons when it was first built and everyone was young and excited about their new homes. How the community had grown and changed over the years. How leadership mattered in ways both big and small. "You ever think about running for the board?" Tom asked. "God, no. I have had enough HOA drama for a lifetime." Tom chuckled. "Fair enough, but you would be good at it. You do not scare easy and you care about doing things right. I will leave that to people like you and Susan. I am happy just being a regular homeowner." "Nothing regular about you, William. You took on Patricia Hensley and won." "I did not take her on. I just wanted to heat my house." And look what happened. Sometimes standing your ground on the small stuff is how you win the big battles. We clinked our beer bottles together and sat in comfortable silence as the evening deepened. Later that night, after Tom had gone home, I went down to my basement and stood in front of my steam boiler. It was such an ordinary thing. Metal and pipes and water and heat. Nothing special, but it had changed everything. I thought about all the ways life could surprise you. How a simple home improvement project could unravel years of neglect. How one person's stubbornness could expose systemic problems. How standing up to a bully could protect people you did not even know. The boiler hissed softly, doing its job, keeping my home warm. I smiled and headed back upstairs to bed. In August, the local newspaper ran a feature story about the Meadowbrook Commons situation. The headline read, "Local HOA dispute leads to statewide safety reforms." They interviewed me, Tom, George Martinez, and Rachel Singh from the Attorney General's office. The story laid out the entire timeline, from Patricia's initial complaint to the courtroom judgment to the new legislation. The article went viral online. HOA reform advocates shared it thousands of times. I started receiving emails from people across the country dealing with their own HOA nightmares, asking for advice. I tried to respond to as many as I could, always with the same basic message. Document everything, stand your ground when you are right, and do not be afraid to escalate to higher authorities when local leadership fails. Several people told me I should write a book about my experience. I considered it but ultimately decided against it. I was not a writer. I was just a guy who had installed a boiler and inadvertently started a revolution. By September, life had truly returned to normal. I had stopped thinking about the whole mess except when someone brought it up. The community center was thriving. The new boiler had performed flawlessly through the summer and was ready for the upcoming winter. Property values in Meadowbrook Commons had actually increased slightly, as buyers were attracted to the neighborhood's newfound reputation for responsible governance. Patricia's house sold in October. A young couple with 2 kids moved in. They seemed nice. I welcomed them to the neighborhood and told them about all the community amenities. I did not mention the previous owner or the drama she had caused. That was ancient history now. On a cold evening in late November, exactly 1 year after the initial inspection, I was sitting in my living room when I heard a gentle hissing from the floor vent. My boiler, starting its cycle, warming my home against the Chicago winter. I listened to that familiar sound and felt grateful. Grateful that I had trusted my instincts and installed the system. Grateful that I had stood up to Patricia when she tried to bully me. Grateful that a simple inspection had uncovered a dangerous situation before anyone got hurt. Sometimes the smallest decisions have the biggest impacts. Sometimes doing the right thing for yourself ends up helping everyone around you. Sometimes one person standing firm can change an entire system. I learned all of that from a steam boiler. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Board meeting next week. Want to grab dinner after? I smiled and typed back, sure, but I am still not joining the board. Worth a shot, he replied, followed by a laughing emoji. I looked around my warm, comfortable home, the house I had bought 3 years ago. The house that had become the center of a neighborhood drama, a legal battle, and a statewide reform movement. Just a regular house in a regular suburban development in Naperville, Illinois, except nothing about the past year had been regular at all. The steam boiler hissed softly in the basement and I settled deeper into my couch content. The long ordeal was finally, completely, truly over. Patricia was gone. The community was safe. The reforms were in place. Life was good, and my house was warm.